The naval revolution that had been hinted at in the Coral Sea would be fully realized at Midway. A battle for which Japan gathered massive naval strength.
The Japanese objective at Midway was to destroy the US Navy. And to do this, they decided to move on Midway Island. Midway Island was an island on the Hawaii defence perimeter. And the plan was to entice the US Navy into a trap and destroy it, which would, of course, if that had occurred, it would have given the Japanese free rein over the west coast of the USA, and they would have also had the opportunity to attack Hawaii.
American patrols sighted Japanese warships and troop transports several hundred miles out at sea, heading for this island of Midway. He decided that this was the place to make a stand, and committed all available ships to a bold attack.
The Japanese Navy was, as had been proven early in the 20th century, when she destroyed the Imperial Russian fleet, a match for anyone. But repeatedly, in the story of battles won and lost in the Second World War, we find the difference between victory and defeat rests with the difference between concentration and dispersal.
The problem with the Japanese was that they had scattered their fleet over a very wide area. It was organised into component parts, none of which could support each other. So, in effect, as a total number, the Japanese outnumbered the Americans, but when it came to a face-to-face battle, they didn't.
The American fleet went into the battle with another advantage, because the Coral Sea encounter ruled both Zuikaku and Shokaku out of the Midway engagement. Yorktown, on the other hand, which was estimated to require 3 months for repair, was swarmed over by 1,400 workers, and they had the job done in 2 days. She was in the line of battle. The Japanese had a complicated plan. The second carrier strike force would go north to the Aleutians. Midway, near enough midway between Hawaii and Japan, would be approached across a broad front of ocean. A significant force would break off to possibly support action in the Aleutians. It was labelled the Aleutians Screening Force. The fleet proper would divide. The invasion force under Admiral Kondo would hold back. The main body under Yamamoto would also wait, allowing Nagumo to press the attack with the first carrier strike force, built around the 4 carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. To the south of the main force was the close support force under Admiral Kurita. In the event, Admirals Kurita, Yamamoto, and Kondo would play no part in this most decisive battle. The Americans, by contrast, were sailing to the battle zone in a compact formation. Rear Admiral Jack Fletcher, Task Force 17, again flying his flag from Yorktown, and Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance in Task Force 16 with the carriers Enterprise and Hornet, giving the Americans 3 carriers to the Japanese 4. But the Americans had another advantage. They knew exactly what to expect. Their crypto-analysts had cracked the Japanese naval code.
They could read Japanese orders, they knew Japanese plans, they knew where the Japanese would be and in what strength. It was absolutely decisive.
A submarine patrol was on station at Midway, and aircraft based there could extend surveillance to about 500 kilometers from the island. The stage was set. Around 4:30 in the morning of June 4th, Nagumo, steaming about 400 kilometers northwest of the island, initiated the action by committing about half of his total air arm to an attack on Midway. The battle continued in bursts over the next 2 days. The course of the Battle of Midway was first influenced by Admiral Nagumo's decision when his aircraft returned to their ships, and his pilots reported a failure to completely destroy the installations and aircraft on Midway. Nagumo ordered them to be rearmed with bombs rather than torpedoes for a second attack on the island. At 5:45, after a Catalina had sighted the Japanese task force, the American carriers turned towards the enemy that they would engage but never see.
With carrier warfare, it was quite clear the person who struck first was going to win. And the Japanese lost that little advantage, and the Americans were able to conduct an extraordinarily successful strike. Had the Japanese found the Americans first and focused on conducting a mass strike against the Americans, it could have gone the other way.
Enterprise and Hornet launched their first attacks on the Japanese ships shortly after 6. They launched 29 torpedo bombers, of which they lost 24. These were outdated Devastator aircraft, and after Midway, they were withdrawn from service. They had failed to record a single hit on a Japanese ship, but they had, most importantly, disorganized the enemy fleet and forced its air cover down to sea level. Above them, squadrons from Enterprise and Yorktown went in. It was mid-morning, and these were the much more effective Dauntless aircraft, responsible for sinking more Japanese vessels than any other weapon. The battle would continue, but its outcome was decided in 5 minutes. Nagumo gave the order to launch at 10:20, but at 10:25, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey of the USS Enterprise's Air Group led his 37 Dauntless dive bombers in from an altitude of 14,000 feet in a 70-degree dive at 280 knots. The carrier Akagi was hit first. Then Kaga. Last, Soryu, as dive bombers from Yorktown joined the assault. Aircraft from the remaining Japanese carrier meanwhile hit Yorktown, but the losses in aircraft were great.
Japanese planes were shot down by the score. One flew slap into this.
These losses meant that Hiryu, though she remained active, was weakly protected, and in the last carrier action of June 4th, came under attack from the Dauntless dive bombers, so that as the sun set, all 4 Japanese carriers were sinking. Yorktown, too, was in a bad state and had to be abandoned. During the night of the 4th of June, Japan's 4 carriers were either sunk or scuttled. The main Japanese force had by now sailed to within range of the Midway-based B-17, and these attacked as, during the 6th, the American fleet searched the seas.
On the first day, we hit about 30 ships of all types, battleships, cruisers, stores, transports. Second day, we hit the carriers.
Any luck with them?
Oh, yes.
Knocked them right in there.
The Yorktown was taken in tow, but both the carrier and the destroyer Hamam that had come to her aid were sunk by torpedoes from a Japanese submarine. News of the engagement was passed to Prime Minister Tojo in Tokyo in suitably formal, courtly style. The Navy, he was told by General Moritaki Tanabe, has made a great mistake. Midway was a decisive naval battle whose outcome was decided not by ships, but by almost 500 aircraft. Midway has always been a candidate for turning point. Was the outcome of the war in the Pacific decided in those 2 days of naval action? What happened placed the American and Japanese fleets on an approximately equal footing. What happened next most influenced the course of the war. Between Midway and 1944, Japan built 6 new fleet carriers. The United States built 14.
America is building freighters by day and night. Red-hot rivets and red-hot rivet catchers are on the job. They're turning out the ships, and the ships are delivering the goods.
The production capacity was central to what happened in the rest of the War of the Pacific. The American industrial machine was gearing up in 1942, and its products really started to come out in mass numbers in 1943.
If Midway was a victory at sea, it was made decisive by the shipyards and factories that could make good the losses in a way that Japan simply could not match.
The Japanese, on the other hand, had no similar mass building program, nor the ability to mobilize such large numbers of educated people. And I think that's a very important point. It's not just the extraordinary American industrial output that gave you so many aircraft carriers, so many aircraft, so many battleships, and so many other ships. It was this extraordinary ability to take an educated population and train them for people who'd never seen the sea to go out and be effective sailors, officers at all levels.